This is Inside the FLX from FingerLakes1.com. I'm Ted Baker. It's our live Tuesday edition in our Seneca Falls studios, and I'm joined by an old friend from the radio days, Chris Lavin, Executive Director of the Geneva Boys and Girls Clubs. Welcome.
Good morning, Ted. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's been a while. We're going to talk about some of the things that you're doing at the clubs, but also some of the larger issues that you've identified in your work with the clubs and some of the things that you plan to do about them. I want to start with this. We both have a background in traditional media, me in radio, you in newspapers.
Right.
What do you make of the current state of the newspaper industry, and could they have done anything to prevent the decline that came when the internet got big?
Oh boy, that's a really big question. And I was a senior editor at the San Diego Union Tribune. I helped run the St. Petersburg Times for some years. I ran the Rochester papers as a city editor and as a reporter. So I really rode down the razor blade of decline of the industry throughout my whole career. I think most of us thought that we would be able to finish our careers in that line of work, but the decline was faster and more, the loss of revenue more rapid. And I do think that it's not been talked about a lot in America, but I do think that part of the problem was that the ownership model for newspapers was sort of fat and happy. For 150 years, they had pretty much turned on the presses and dollar bills came out the other side. Hundreds to thousands of dollars for even a small paper every year. I think in 2007, the San Diego Union Tribune, after taxes, cleared $121 million to its owner or something like that. And just a few years later, it was almost a break even. The decline was that fast. What really happened was, I think that the ownership had saw this problem coming for years, but didn't adapt. It was so used to just counting on 23 and 24% return on investment per year, when General Motors was making 7%, that any real innovations they needed to do to maintain the franchise of the new media within its brands seemed costly and less remunerative to them. And so I think that basically the ownership of the newspapers failed. Their employees failed their communities in quite often, and it's a sort of untold story that right now in America, probably 50% of the number of reporters and editors looking at the issues of our government and our operations, municipal government, city schools, everything like that, are getting half the scrutiny that they used to get because the newspaper media declined. Television and radio had its own diaspora with the proliferation of many different ways, and it less concentrated its finances. And so that again reduced the presence of journalism. And what's resulted is sort of a domination of a few major national brands, which are, thank God, the New York Times exists and that it can find a way to keep doing its work. But that doesn't do much for Geneva, or for Waterloo, or for Seneca Falls, or for Rochester, or even for San Diego, frankly. Major metros that don't have the reach of the New York Times and don't have the online enrollment of people. So I think we're in a crisis as journalism seeks new homes. Frankly, what you're doing here is one of the experiments. Can it generate the revenue to support good journalism and good community input? And why I'm glad to participate in it. But it is very much an experiment.
Let's talk about your work at the clubs. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, I've said one of the things that the pandemic did was reveal some problems that were always there, but we sort of chose not to look. Yeah. One of them is hunger and feeding people. You essentially trained yourself in food service over a period of a few months, started collaborating with a number of agencies, and began a major feeding program. Tell us how that happened.
Yeah, I was just greeting my new employees for the next school year that starts in a couple of weeks, and yesterday, and I was recounting how much we've had to remake ourselves and how much I've been, I mean, I get too much credit, I get too much praise for what we've done. The truth is, we've been reteaching ourselves left and right, identifying needs, trying to find answers and trying to put it together, and then desperately seeking the funding to maintain what we're doing. That's the tough side. The good side is, you're right, people were hungry. Seniors were making decisions between medicines and food. There was a desperation out there and sort of a lack of kindness within our culture about food, about basic necessities of life. There was still, I think there's still a bit of an ethic that the poor get what they deserve. They somehow made themselves poor, when we know that it's much more complex than that. There's generations of struggle and child rearing in conditions that don't lead to success. And to turn around and blame those people for their situation is not a kind thing, particularly for a culture like ours. And I think in some ways the pandemic has made us a better people. And yes, I'm glad to have been part of that, but the goodness is across the community and across, can't tell you there isn't a day that goes by that somebody doesn't reach out and say, thank you for what you're doing, here's some help. And to me, the kindness is in that action. I get paid to do what I do, you know.
You work very closely with the Geneva school system. A new superintendent is coming in Bo Wright. Have you met with him several times, and is he getting on board in terms of what you do and what you'd like to do with the schools?
Yes, you know, I have a big unified theory of life in the Finger Lakes, and Bo Wright's return from a larger school district in a larger town that was paying a larger salary reminded me of my own return to the Finger Lakes, where I was making more money and doing grander things in San Diego, but I came back to my hometown with a sort of commitment. And I think that's such a gift to Geneva that Bo has decided he wants to come back to where he was raised, use the skills he's learned at bigger places. He's worked at the New York City School District, the Rochester School District, ran Henrietta, which was much bigger than Geneva, and he's come back, and I have every faith that he's going to quickly turn the district around and settle it down and join basically what I've been trying to do for 7 years, which is make sure that every kid in Geneva, regardless of race, ethnicity, or wealth, gets what they need. The concomitants of success are put in their hands.
One of the things you've identified is the importance of the early days in a child's life, and thus the first 1,000 Days program was born. That began in January. Tell us how that program's gone.
That's also a pandemic generator, because in getting the relationship with FoodLink out of Rochester, it allowed me to do something I thought we needed to do from the day I got here, which was, if you see kids in kindergarten, first grade who are not ready to learn, you can't blame the school district for that. The blame or the cause is obviously in the years that preceded. And all the studies, including done by Geneva, by Success for Geneva's Children, everything says that those early years are so key. Nutrition, exposure to things, hearing of words, just the quality of life for first, second, and third year of life really are almost determinants of how you're going to do during those key years where you're supposed to be learning to read. And it's so easy to follow. So we started the first 1,000 days. It's in development, but the demand has been unbelievable. We just put the flag out, and we have 110 families. Every Saturday, we have a pancake breakfast. People of all sorts, rich, poor, medium income, come on Saturdays to share time as young parents, use the gym, have pancakes, listen to music, do things that, and it occurred to me that, that's not different than what we do for 8 and 9-year-olds when we build a football field or a baseball field, and we invest heavily in the lives of an 8 and 9-year-old, but not in those years when, as a community, when their brains are forming, when their parents are under the most stress. Anybody who's had a kid. We had 2 parents for my son, 2 jobs, more than enough income, and damn, it was hard, to change your life that much. So Geneva's doing that. Geneva's getting on board. I have parents who show up, elderly parents who show up every Saturday to make the pancakes and just weigh in with young parents on advice. We're delivering food to many of those families, even if they don't need it. We're saying, we're going to give you good nutrition. It's not going to be something you have to worry about. Spend your money on other things for the kid. Start a college fund, that sort of thing. So that's going well. Again, I'm always out over my skis on these things, but I believe if you do good things and you can show the good, that the funding is out there in the philanthropic world. So we'll find it.
We're going to talk about some of the greater challenges facing the city, but before we do that, I want to talk about the tools that we have to meet those challenges. You mentioned Success for Geneva's Children,
Right.
Geneva 2030, Blueprint Geneva. In my opinion, one of the best things that you've done at the clubs is all of the collaborations you've built with these other organizations and sort of gotten everybody rowing in the same direction.
That's part of what 2030 wants to do, and it's Geneva. I mean, I believe that a lot of the trends in the world are pointing towards a place like Geneva. The water, the environmental, the cost of living, all the things that are just devastating everywhere else in the country. Imagine people think, oh, North Carolina, isn't that beautiful? Well, you're living in North and South Carolina. For a good part of the year, increasingly with hot weather, you have to worry about tornadoes coming over the horizon and wiping your house out. Most of those states south of Washington, D.C. are in drought and have been for years. Florida is invading its own aquifer every year a little bit more. Salt's coming from below as the water disappears from above. Look at the Finger Lakes. We have water, we have wine, we have the development of distant working. We have investors coming in from elsewhere saying, look at what we have here. I like to call it America's Lake District. Within Geneva, within the city of Geneva, we have a good ethic of caring. They financed, and I told my staff yesterday, that little town built a $6 million community center with the intention of having the Boys and Girls Club and everyone else benefit in this town. That's the kind of thing you don't see. Frankly, you don't see it much in the Finger Lakes in general. You don't see that kind of intense investment. And then groups like Success for Geneva's Children, Geneva 2030, all with the intention of getting everybody to the table, executives to the workers. I think the thing we need to do is we have to start acknowledging we can't just form organizations. We have to put some W's on the board. We have to have a little bit more focus on our priorities and start executing a little bit better as a community. But the pieces are all in place. We're held back a little bit by history, I think, and hesitance, lack of confidence. But I think Geneva, in my opinion, is so central to the success of the Finger Lakes as a whole. We're not Canandaigua, which is really a suburb of Rochester. We're not Auburn and Skaneateles that are really parts of Syracuse almost. We are the urban heart of a region that's really on the upswing. And we need to execute well to bring a cohesion to the Finger Lakes and to what we're doing and to remain the heart of that. I can't tell you, Corning, Canandaigua, Auburn, Watkins Glen, Ithaca, they would love to sit where Geneva sits right now, which is in the heart of where new and different and good is happening.
Geneva has these great things going for it, but there always also remains that danger that a certain percentage of the population is not going to share in that bounty and get left behind. That was one of the topics of the book that you co-wrote about a year or so ago. Tell us about the book.
Well, the book, we called it, it was an essay within a photo book of the pandemic done by Jan Reagan, who's one of the city council people in Geneva right now. The message was, we did better in the pandemic. In fact, the Finger Lakes, arguably, if you want to be crass, could benefit it. People discovered us more. They liked the openness, the distance. We had the greatest hotel and restaurant performance during the pandemic in the history of the community. Since then, we've seen investment. We've seen new things rising, where the American Legion used to be in Geneva. That's in the city of Geneva. The new owners of Geneva on the Lake have bold plans to link that institution to Italy and have it be a center of Italian culinary arts in America. They're going to add 50 new rooms. This is all along what I like to think of as the Geneva Gold Coast. could be a place where condo and mixed-use development happens along Lockland Road and overlooking the beautiful lake, but not necessarily crowding the lake shore down at the other end. And so all these great things are happening, but Geneva has a long history, and there's a lot of people who've stayed there all their lives, and I think they're afraid. They're afraid of developers taking advantage of them or losing the control of their institutions, their fire department and their police department, which are not just service or groups for the community, but they're also employment and family histories. There's histories of stuff. And I think the city's finances are a wreck. Its leadership is in disarray. The council doesn't talk to each other a lot. They're trying to do better. They have a new city manager, and perhaps she can lead some new attitudes. But I think it's held back a little bit by its lack of confidence and fear of past failures that they've had. So it's a key time for the community, and that's why I'm glad you're out here talking about it. We need to be bolder. Hobart and William Smith colleges, for example. You know, in some ways, Geneva is a company town, and HWS is the company. Yet there are still people in town who have resentments towards the greatest economic engine of their own community. And they will still say, oh, those college people up there, that you see that. But that's a lingering.
I mean, that's pretty typical of a lot of college towns, though.
It is, but Geneva was way worse in that way 20 years ago, and they've really Hobart and William Smith, and under Mark Gear and Mary, who are now back, really beat that back. But we need to stamp it out. We need to understand that if HWS succeeds, so does the community. The hospital is under stress. It needs both engagement, transparency, and discussions about its future. Unlike the Canandaigua Hospital or the Auburn Hospital that can really link itself to the bigger cities nearby, I think Geneva General has to stand on its own 2 feet. And we need to know, can that be done in this environment? Do they need our help? That sort of thing.
You mentioned Hobart and William Smith, and I feel bad for President Jacobson because she came in at a very challenging time with the pandemic. There was some loss of enrollment. And when it was announced that Mark Gearin was coming back, I mean, I think just everybody went, hooray. I mean, he's a tough act to follow, and now he gets to follow himself and come back and do great things.
Yeah, but Joyce is a very sharp and good person. She was good for the colleges, and she was decisive at a time when they needed to be very decisive, and they still do. And so Mark is coming back, and everybody, I thought they were not cheering her departure at all.
No, oh no, that's what I mean.
But they were saying this is, it's almost like the founding father has come back of the way this college used to be, and his wife, frankly, Mary Gearin, is the mother. Well, she's better than Mother Teresa, I guess.
She kept her membership in the Geneva Rotary Club.
She attended more Rotary meetings from Boston than I did in Geneva.
Right.
And, so that's a good thing for Geneva too, that they're back and they're familiar at a time when the colleges need to be nimble and move. That's another industry. It's funny, Geneva is, with all the good things happening in the Finger Lakes, all of its major institutions are under significant stress. The HWS from its enrollment in a difficult time. Cornell under a period in which they had been drawing everything back to Ithaca and away from Geneva. Now they're doing a little bit better on that front. The hospital is still stands out there as a prize to be fought over by these regional medical industries. And the question for Genevans is, what kind of treatments can we get in Geneva? Do you have to drive 45 minutes to get an x-ray? Is that the future of medicine in Geneva or not?
Do we have any choice? I mean, is an independent Finger Lakes Health just a foregone conclusion that it's not going to last that much longer?
Well, I think there's partnerships are always part of it, the industry now. That's going to happen. But independence and control, that's a community asset. It has a large endowment, and it has proximity. Again, we're not 15 or 20 minutes to downtown Rochester. We're 45 minutes to everything. And on the other hand, I have to say that having partners like Strong Memorial Hospital and even Rochester Regional and their specialties is phenomenally great for upstate and for us. We all go there at some time in our life. But Geneva, it's one of the biggest employers in town. Hospitals, doctors, nurses, things that are doing here. And I think we need
That's the case in almost every community. I mean, for example, Pittsburgh For
Right.
years and years, the biggest employer was the steel industry. Now, I believe it's University of Pittsburgh Medical Center.
Services, yeah. So I think that that's part of the mixture of what will be part of the revival and rebirth of Geneva. Population going up, housing, perhaps new housing starts. Wouldn't that be great?
You mentioned the city government and specifically the city council. There was a fundamental change in the council a couple years back, so you had some people who weren't experienced. And my theory is, I think what we've seen in national politics, that sort of divisiveness and those talking points have now trickled their way down to local politics, where it used to be, I'm a Republican, you're a Democrat, but we both love Geneva, we'll work together. I don't see as much of that anymore. Now it's I'm a Republican, you're a Democrat, and I'm good and you're bad.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not here long enough and I'm not an expert enough. I do know that the council is very large for a small city. I mean, the city in California that I lived in, 65,000 people, had 4 council people and a mayor and a city manager. And that focused a little bit more of the decision-making, and also wasn't that hard to come up with 4 or 5 really good people to do those jobs. City of 12,000, having 9 is, and having the division between at-large and district, it's just it's a recipe for division. And unless you have a gifted group of people who are caring and kind and can overcome, I can't imagine what national politics has to do with running a sewer system or a water system. Those national issues don't really translate. But there has been there's just too much, those people need to become more kind on the council. I think they need to think about reforming. 4 council and a mayor might be enough for a town that can produce this kind of, talent to run the place.
Yeah, one of the councilors proposed doing away with the at-large councilors. Unfortunately, the at-large councilors were also the 2 that she disagreed with the most. So it coming from her, it seemed very political, but you think that there should be a shrinking down to a more manageable size?
And I don't think there's any reason for districts, really, because it's a small town. You can walk from one side to the other to it in about 20 minutes at most. And we should all be as caring and thoughtful about the people who live on the east side as we do on the west side. The idea that we have to have an entrenched, myopic leadership that only focuses on a piece of the town leads to division, I think, in a small town. But at its heart, kindness, it's sort of funny to talk about it. We just need to become a little bit kinder in our public discourse and not refer to each other as numbnuts and respect the fact that they show up at the meetings and they sit there and put in those hours to care about this community and find the common ground. It really is, we need a good police department, a good fire department, but you also need to be able to afford them. When a developer comes to town, they need to be greeted, met with seriousness and understanding. And that's really the only way out of it for Geneva. Its finances people they see all the work downtown. That's great, but it's all paid for by the state.
Right.
For the most part. And that we need to create an engine in which the tax burden is spread over more properties. The town and city need to work together and share services. It's too small a place to be as divided as we are. And
I always thought frankly, I'll say it, I think the town and city set up in New York is dumb. It doesn't make any sense to me that somebody can be in the town of Geneva and pay no town tax, and they live a mile from downtown Geneva and get the advantage of all of the services that are paid for by other people's taxes.
Yeah, but if the city of Geneva just decided, look, tomorrow, our police are not doing calls into your town anymore, under any conditions. We're not sending the fire trucks one line over the city line. The people in the town would be devastated. Their insurance rates would go up. Their services would go down. And I think generally, if we could overcome those issues, everybody's boat would fly. Just on firefighting alone, the city of Geneva has a professional firefighting company that beats the town departments to most fires. If the city and town simply shared those costs, it would be cheaper for the town. Insurance rates in the town would come down. because they now have professional fire coverage.
And that was something that used to be pretty common in any community of almost any size across the country, and increasingly it's not. I mean, very few other than the biggest cities now have professional firefighters.
Well, yeah, professional firefighters are expensive comparatively. On the other hand, if you have them, you have a much better response time and a much better service. And if you can afford it, that's good. I think this community can, but not with double fire departments, double equipment, double everything else. And these are just things that are difficult because there's long traditions of family histories in departments. But I think you'd have a better equipped, better supplied, and better paid fire department if you just got your act together and said, let's do this for the community.
You told me right before we started this morning you're going to be doing some work with the Geneva downtown bid. What do you plan to do for the bid?
Well, some of these thoughts I have about the world in which I work and trying to help families really does require collaboration. And it requires jobs for the teenagers when they get that age. And it requires better support for scholarships for kids who need to go to college. And you can't live in isolation. I can't live in isolation out at a club outside of town and just come out begging every once in a year. I think if we can work more closely together. So I'm going to be doing some work with the bid too, and their executive director to help them maybe take a more aggressive role in the leadership of the community's business interests. Better business rises all boats. I have 11 kids now working at Wegmans on the line doing cash registers, earning money for college. Imagine if that was 60 kids all over town helping run these businesses, running these sort of things. So I have interests. My club's interest, spread beyond just the after-school program, and so I'd like to contribute.
Well, and I was listening on the radio, driving into work this morning, to a discussion about crime, and I've always said people don't commit crime because they think it's fun or it's cool or they want to. They do it when they don't see any other better possibility in their lives.
Yeah.
If somebody can get a decent education and a decent job, they're much less likely to become a carjacker.
Right. And in reality, if you look at the numbers in Geneva, there's not a lot of crime. There's more crime in Geneva than Penn Yan, and there's more than in Naples. Although you're not quite sure of that because there's not nearly as many police at either of those places, and not as much, the tweakers out in the countryside in Naples don't get picked up with the frequency that you do if you do the same thing in Geneva. But that's just the nature of cities. But I do think that Geneva's a safe place, and most of its crime is not a stranger crime. It's not a stranger coming to town and robbing me. It tends to be domestic and related, as you're saying, directly to poverty, to the conditions under which people live, their opportunities to get other things, and the kind of education they were able to get. We're still turning out kids not ready for the workforce in Geneva. We can do better, and I think the state results and tests show that too.
Every time I talk to you, you say you hate to come hat in hand, so I'll bring your hat for you.
Yeah.
Hold it out. Tell us about how people can support the clubs and the things you're trying to do.
Well, we will have an annual campaign during the holidays where we just ask for donations. We're going to have an annual dinner in October, and we're going to have auctions. And if you, it's not my strength is not development and asking for money. But we're doing great work, and I think in some ways it's hard for people to understand, but I think we're doing unique work. We're doing pioneering work, all family concern, and it's not just Chris Lavin and the Boys and Girls Club. There's people all over town who show up to hand out the food during our food distributions. Every 2 weeks, they give 4 or 5 hours to come out and make sure that people are getting food. There's a good heart in the community. I do need money to keep doing what I'm doing, particularly with the First 1,000-Day program and the kids. There's so much work we can do there if I can continue to fund the director and get this food into the right place and keep the gym open for them. We're going to measure too. Pat McGuire, the former interim president at Hobart for a while, an economist, is on my board, and he's putting together a plan to measure literally measure these kids when they come to us and comparing them when they get into Head Start or pre-K, how much better they are prepared for that than they might have been otherwise. And we're going to try and let the data show what we're doing. So they can contribute to the club. They can go to BGCA or BGC Geneva, and there's a support the club, and a donation in there would be, wonderful. But also, if you know of an elderly person in your neighborhood who could benefit from having food delivered, a couple of weeks of food delivered a couple of times a month, make sure we get a call and put them on our list too, because we have the food, we have the van, we have the driver. The Mother Cabrini Foundation from New York has been very helpful to me to get us up and started in this food area, and I want to keep that going too. Food into the community is gold. So.
All right, Chris Lavin, Executive Director of the Geneva Boys and Girls Clubs. I've always been a big admirer of the way that you think about these issues and the way you frame them and the collaborations that you've put together to help solve these problems, and I look forward to continuing to talk about it in the future.
Well, I appreciate it, Ted, and kindness gets a long way if you keep it at the heart of what you're doing, not ego. I'm 64. This is what I do.
All right, we thank you for doing it. And we thank you for watching this morning. Next week, to be announced, we'll let you know who the live guest will be on Tuesday. Tomorrow, I'll be talking, speaking of feeding people, with Gilda Browder, the organizer of the Central New York Tomato Fest in Auburn, which raises a lot of money for food pantries. And coming very soon, in probably mid-September, a new live program from 7 to 9 a.m. here on FingerLakes1.com, hosted by me and with contributions from all of our folks on staff. News, weather, sports, everything you'd want in a show. And if you can't watch it in the morning, you can watch it later on in the day because many of those segments will be pre-recorded. Inside the FLX today, produced by Nate Sharman. Thanks for watching.